overwhelming feeling of stress is compounding in America, according to the American Psychological Association. Stress and the consequences on American health. Approximately three quarters, or 76% of Americans say that they felt the health impacts due to stress over the past month, including headaches, 38%, feeling fatigued, 35%, feeling nervous or anxious, 34%, or feeling depressed came in at 33%. Dr. Addie White is the author of the Calm Code. Her clear mission is to help people go from Stressville to Calm Town. She developed a revolutionary method to minimize stress and maximize happiness. And it's all centered around the concept of neuroplasticity. This method and approach has had a profound impact on White's personal life. Her marriage was teetering on the brink of disaster. However, by implementing this methodology and step-by-step system, her marriage and overall quality of life is now thriving. And Dr. White says by the end of this conversation, she wants you to have the tools in your toolbox and the tricks of the trade necessary to find your own version of life, professional, and personal fulfillment. So, without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. I wish you a happy Tuesday. It's great to see you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Watt, I know that you've developed sort of a step-by-step system that helps people sort of minimize their stress level and maximize their happiness in life, and it's all centered around neuroplasticity. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about it.
I can. I was searching for, when I was seeing patients in my office, I was noticing that so many people were coming in with issues that were either caused by sometimes, but usually made worse by stress. And I knew that if I didn't get their stress levels and anxiety levels under control, they could never be truly happy or healthy. So I did about a decade of research into the science of the brain, which you touched on neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity states that every thought, action, and emotion strengthens the corresponding paths in your mind, so that when you go through a stressful or worrisome time, each of those thoughts is strengthening the stress and worrisome parts of your brain, so that after some period of time, when any thought comes up, you're going to interpret it in a more stressed, worried, negative way than you would have otherwise, because those paths in your brain are now dominating. We've strengthened them to the point that thoughts just go there. You might have noticed after a stressful time, smaller and smaller things start to set you off, and this is the reason.
Yeah, and your mission, of course, is to bring people from stress-filled to calm down. And I know that you had a personal journey along the way, and when you implemented these systems, it had a tremendous effect on your personal life. So tell me about your mission and why it affected you personally so much.
Um, yeah, so I love that question. And I developed this for my patients, tools for my patients in my office, right? Because I would never need it, would I? No, I was the one who knew about stress. But then I went through a very stressful period of about 2.5 years. And sometimes when you're in the midst of it, you can't see the forest through the trees. And I had wired my own, strengthened my own mind on those pathways so that I became highly irritable, anxious. I was negative. My interpretation of life was much more negative than it ever had been. And it culminated one afternoon. It was late afternoon, and I found myself on the hardwood floor in my living room, not able to get up because I was sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe because my husband had just said he couldn't do our relationship anymore and he walked out the door. And in that moment, I felt hopeless and heartbroken and like I had failed. And it wasn't just that I had failed the marriage, I had failed to follow through on my own advice that I have been giving people for all of these years. I didn't use any of the things that I knew could help. And I know we all come to different points for different reasons. And I truly believe I got to that point so I could figure out that this really worked. I mean, people told me for years that it worked, but you don't really know until you go through it yourself, until you experience it yourself. So I dedicated time every single day to these tools. And I assured my husband that it was helping me get back on track. I didn't see much change for about 2 weeks. And then after that, things started to shift. And so I really knew I was on the right track. And once I saw, it was about 6 weeks when I saw things really shift for me and I was getting back to myself and even a happier version of myself or a calmer version of myself. I knew that I had to get this into the hands of everyone who needs it because I know what it's like to be there. And it's not fun. And a lot of people don't know that they have control over the situation. I didn't even realize that or think about that. And I was a person who knew this stuff. So
Well, sometimes we have to be our own best teacher, right?
that's right.
Absolutely. You know, Doctor, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So I used to work for the local YMCA as their lead job developer. And the way my office was set up, my desk was directly across from my boss. So, and she was noticing that I would be answering emails after 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and she looked at me one day and she said, "You know that you don't always have to answer an email the second it comes into your inbox." And then she challenged me for 10 days to close my lap after I had left the office to close my laptop and not answer an email until I got to the office the next day because she wanted to lower sort of my work-life balance. I was putting more into my work than I was into my life. So the question is, how do you think we can take our work and life and strike an equal balance?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a really important one. And I think what you were touching on in your story is about boundaries. It's about us setting our own boundaries about what we will and won't do with work. How much will we let work infiltrate our lives? You're like you said, we have a choice whether to answer those emails at that time, to call that client back at that time, to stay at work and not be at home, right? We can dictate all of those things. So I think it's really important for us to be our own best advocate and set those clear, solid boundaries. And some people think, oh, I won't be able to do that. My work won't let me do that. And I would say start small. You don't have to do everything all at one time, but just take small steps, because it's those small steps that will really lead to that balance in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, I know you wrote one of the tools to do that in your book in Compto, and I know that there was a special guest who wrote the foreword for the book. So tell me about the book, the process of writing it, and what you hope people get out of it.
That's a great question. I will start with your question about the guest who wrote the foreword. His name is Jack Canfield. He wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul series and the Success Principles. And he read the book and he really loved it, and he agreed to write the foreword for it. And I was very, very, very excited about that. The process of writing the book, the process of writing isn't easy, right? It's not like you just sit down and you then have this book. I mean, I did all of the research and part of the writing for it over a 10-year period. And then it took me 3 years to really write the book. And the first version wasn't honestly very good, right? Because you have to write and then you have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And it takes time and it takes effort. And if you want it to be good and you want it to be readable and you want it to be engaging, you have to keep tweaking it and work with an editor if you can. So I did all of those things. And part of the process was amazingly fun, and part of the process was really challenging, because some days it didn't just come. Some days I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I don't know, if this will happen. It's not flowing today. And then some days was great. And some days it was fun and it flowed. And I was like, oh, okay, I got this. So the book is 6 weeks. It is a step-by-step process. You start with 3 minutes twice a day. You work up to 8 minutes twice a day. And I give you new tools every single week to basically strengthen those calm and happy parts of your mind.
Yeah, and Doctor, I'm curious to ask you about a common sort of phrase that we all hear and get your perspective on. We often hear the phrase, life is 90% of what you can control and 10% what happens to you. I'm fascinated to ask you from the lens of reducing stress in your work and what you do with your clients. How do you view that, say? How do you think we can provide more context when we hear that in our everyday life?
My opinion of that statement is that it's very true. And I believe the outer equals the inner, meaning what we have going on inside, emotionally, thought wise, what we're visualizing turns up outside. And if we're visualizing positive things, typically that will turn up outside. Or the opposite is also true. If we're constantly worried and constantly stressed, we will usually see those things. And when challenging situations show up in my life, I question what's going on inside to make this show up outside. Now, I like the 10% part happen to you, because things like someone passing away, someone getting a major illness that you care about, those are things that are not in your control, right? Those I do think happen, and those aren't because we have materialized that. Those are things in life that are outside of our control, just like you said. But I do think most things are in our control, and our life and our state of mind and our emotions and what happens is up to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Doctor, I always tell people that we're all given a life compass, and it's incumbent upon all of us to point it in the direction we want it to go, right?
Absolutely. And we're all going to have challenges because, like you said, we're all human. We have challenges in different ways, but nobody gets through this without challenges. Nobody gets through this without hard times or things that we have to deal with and handle. So I think you're right. It's in handling those things in a powerful way and dealing with the things that are thrown at us the best we can in every situation and giving ourselves grace and kindness, knowing that we are human. And guess what? We're all going to screw it up at different times and at different points. And it's okay because it's part of being human.
Well, no one, one of the great things in life is learning from our imperfections, isn't it?
It is. And, it sounds so cliche. Oh, seeing our imperfections as gifts. But if we can do that, and it's not always in the moment that it happens, sometimes it's in retrospect because we don't always react in ways that we want to react. We're not always perfect. And I think giving ourselves the grace to know, A, perfect people are boring, B, perfect people don't exist, and C, we're human and we're allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to fall down. We're going to fall down.
Well, I tell you, if life happened all the time the way it was supposed to, it would lack adventure, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. Sometimes, people always say you have to experience the dark to see the light. You have to have that contrast in order to appreciate it.
Yeah, and to that point, Doctor, just building on that, I'm curious how you view the concept of personal accountability and really holding yourself accountable to make sure that you live the most balanced life that you can.
I think holding ourselves accountable is being on our own side and not letting fear rule us. Because I think a lot of times when we meet that resistance in life, when we're not following through, when we're not able to be accountable, it's because we have blocks there or we have limitations there. We have fears there that are stopping us. And most of the time, those fears aren't real. Fear, they say, false evidence appearing real. So that in the situation, not to let that fear stop us from following through and being accountable in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Watt, I'm also curious to ask you about societal pressure, and the societal pressure of meeting others' expectations. Because, I always said that the only level of expectations you have to meet are your own, but I know that there are societal pressures that people put on themselves to portray themselves in different ways. So, how do you think societal pressure contributes to our stress and our stress levels? How do you think societal pressure plays a part in that?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's a great consciousness to have, especially in our world right now, because social media paints these pictures of these quote unquote perfect, great, amazing lives, right? And everyone has bad days. That person who did that post might have been crying yesterday about something that went wrong. And this social pressure to compare ourselves to other people because it inevitably happens. But what we need to think about is this is a point in time in their life. And if they're posting something online, let's even say it's about their success, we haven't seen what it's taken to get to that point. We haven't seen all the work they've put in, all the challenges they've had, all the maybe even tears they've cried to get to that point. So what we're seeing is this snapshot, and we're comparing this snapshot that isn't the full context. It's not the full story. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that at all times. Just because we're looking at these different, even if it's a neighbor that you think they have it all figured out and maybe you don't, that's really never true because, like we were saying earlier, we're all human and we all go through challenges. And maybe, yeah, they're at a point in their life which is a little bit easier or better, or they've worked hard to get to a certain point in their career or in their life. But it took time and it took effort and it took challenges to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And Doctor, I'm going to share just a quick story about myself. So I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. This simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. And, my part of resilience in my life happened when I was 9 years old. It was the last surgery that I would ever have for the disability that I live with and was born with, and I remember it was like it was yesterday because the doctor who performed my surgery took myself and my parents in a hospital conference room, and he went over the success of the surgery. But at the end of it, he looked at my parents and he said, "Unfortunately, Kevin won't be able to walk for the duration of his life." And the next day, the doctor, I had to go back to school, and I credit my middle school principal at the time, and it was Dr. Carol Crowley, and I had went through because the next day she had called me to her office, and she had everyone that was assigned to my file into her office, from teachers to social workers to therapists, and my parents were there, and I went through the story of what the doctor had said the previous day, and then she stopped me at the end of it, and she said, "Remember, the only limitations on your life are the artificial ones that you place on yourself." And I think that was the sort of trajectory point in my life. So I'm curious, how do you view the concept of resiliency, and how do you think others can put it into practice as well?
First of all, I have to say that is an absolutely amazing story. And that
Well, thank you.
at 9 years old, you could take her truth and make it your own. I love that. I honor that. I think that's incredible. And I can tell that you in your own life, you don't let things limit you. And you're such a good example for all of us that you can accomplish in life what you intend to accomplish. And resilience is all a part of that because I'm sure you experienced in your life, you had to overcome these challenges. You had to overcome that diagnosis of that doctor. You had to overcome all of these things that were set in your way. But you decided, no, here's what I'm going to do. Here are my rules, and here's how I'm going to live. And no matter how many times I fall down or how many times I have challenges, I'm going to get back up and I'm going to give myself the grace and the truth to believe that I set my limitations. And I think that's incredible. And I think that's such an example for everyone listening to your podcast and everyone who needs this advice, which I believe is everyone on our earth. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, Doctor. And, in the final minutes that I have with you this morning, I'm curious to ask you about legacy. It's how I end all of my podcasts, Doctor, and asking the people that I interview, when you look at your life from a personal and professional standpoint, Doctor, how do you want your legacy to be defined?
That's a great question. That's a nice, deep question. I like it. I would like to be known as someone who came to this earth and helped people. I want to leave this earth a more peaceful, happy place than when I came, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one final follow-up to that, Doctor. I'm curious how you view the concept of empathy, because we live in such an instant gratification sort of society today, and we're always interested in the end goal of something, but I think there's a deficit of empathy in the world, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to start the podcast, to bring us sort of closer together from a societal perspective. So how do you view the concept of empathy?
I love that. The empathy, I think the reason that we're having less empathy today, is because there has been so much that has gone on, especially with this pandemic for people. But even before the pandemic, we were in a stress epidemic, and people were just kind of running around with their hair on fire, and they really could only stay in their lane. They weren't able to take on empathy. To me, is caring about other people, and having that kindness, having that wherewithal to be able to reach out and say, I see what you're going through, and I understand it, and I can hold it. It's not that I can fix it, and it's not that I have necessarily even a solution, but I have the kindness and the caring to hear what you're saying and to want to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Fondocelli, if people want to get connected with you or buy the book, what's the best way they can do that?
My website is Doctor AnnieWhite.com. They can get the book on Amazon.com or Barnes and Noble, iBooks, Audible. It's on IndieBound. And if their local bookstore doesn't have it, tell them to order it for you.
Absolutely. Well, Doctor, I really want to thank you for starting my morning with such a robust and insightful conversation about minimizing stress and maximizing productivity and potential. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated. And I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your podcast, because I know you're helping people every single episode. I love it, and keep doing what you're doing because it's wonderful.
Well, thank you for being on, and thank you so very much for the compliment. It's most appreciated.
Absolutely.